I am the eldest son, and you knew that living with my mother would be a possibility when we got married, didn't you? You never mentioned that when we first tied the knot. My husband Robert had moved in with my mother-in-law earlier than his sister, and after selling his family home, he left me with the sole responsibility of taking care of her. I'm a stay-at-home wife, and he must have planned this for a long time. My name is Laura, and I'm a 46-year-old housewife. Robert is 44 and works for a decent company as a subsection manager, often boasting about his Ivy League education. We have 2 sons, making us a family of 4. But now, with our youngest son having graduated from college this summer and moved out, my husband has started acting on his own. We're going to take in my mom soon, he declared. Hearing this for the first time, I was shocked. My mother-in-law lost her husband, my father-in-law, last year. Considering they did everything together, I had been concerned about how deeply this loss must have affected her. But living together suddenly, anyone would be surprised. Robert implied that I had plenty of time since I'm a stay-at-home wife. He instructed me to visit my mother-in-law every day and talk to her. I argued that daily visits might exhaust her, but Robert's aim was clear. He wanted us to get along through frequent visits, making it easier for him to implement his plan of us living together. My mother-in-law's house is a stylish, standalone home built by my late father-in-law in a popular suburban area of Chicago. If put up for sale, there would certainly be many buyers willing to pay a great price. Robert had his eyes on this house. By living with my mother-in-law, he wanted to gain the right to do whatever he pleased with it. A few days later, Robert came home looking irritated. Apparently, his sister had contacted him. "You have been visiting my mom, haven't you?" he said, roughly throwing his coat at me. "Yes, about once every 3 or 4 days," I replied, hanging his carelessly thrown coat on a hanger. "My sister visited Mom today for the first time in a while," Robert said, his tone sharp. "She said the entire house was a mess from the kitchen to the bathroom. You have been cleaning up over there, haven't you?" I was irritated by his insinuation that I might be lounging around and snacking while visiting my mother-in-law. "Of course I've been helping with the chores and shopping. I've even organized the fridge before leaving," I said, trying to keep my composure. Robert laughed scornfully. "Well, I guess this is the most I can expect from a housewife," he said, glancing around the living room. It hadn't been long since our youngest son moved out, so the room wasn't spotless, but it was far from being messy enough to disrupt our daily lives. Robert has a nasty habit of nagging me about being a full-time housewife whenever he's in a bad mood. He always picks on the smallest things. If I stay silent, he assumes he's won the argument, and his mood improves as he believes he's triumphed. I often wonder if belittling me is really that satisfying for him. When he comes home tired from work, he demands, "Get my dinner out on the table already." Seriously, can't you do anything without me telling you? This was typical of Robert, always trying to assert his dominance. One day, I received a call from my sister-in-law. She had apparently had a conversation with Robert and told me, "Robert insists that if he moves in with Mom, he should be able to sell the house and keep all the money for himself." "Laura, are you planning to move in?" She offered to take our mother-in-law, and if I had any hesitations about living with her, I told her we had just started discussing the possibility recently. She responded as if she had her own schemes in mind. "So it's not confirmed yet then," and hung up. When I told Robert about this conversation, he became furious. "Why did you reveal our plans without asking me?" he barked. I replied, "This is about discussing our mother's future, isn't it? You make it sound like a property dispute." He gave me a scornful look and sneered, "I really hate dealing with idiots who can't think straight." This is the real dynamic of our relationship. Robert belittles me for being a housewife and a high school graduate, always trying to make me submit to him. When we got married, I was drawn to his confidence and reliability, but those traits have morphed into what I loathe about him. What's worse, he occasionally boasts about marrying an older woman, mocking me for being 2 years older and not having a college degree. He pushed me into being a housewife, claiming no one would want to hire a high school graduate. Ever since our children moved out, I've been feeling more and more stress about my interactions with Robert. To be honest, I feel like I've reached my limit with this marriage. Robert, oblivious to my feelings, likely wants to move in with his mother as soon as possible, probably aiming to pocket all the money from selling her house. He doesn't seem to consider how his parents might feel about their home being sold or the memories they've built there. Amid these conflicting family interests, I encountered a shocking reality. It began with a call from my mother-in-law, who had sprained her ankle. She said her room was a mess and needed help cleaning it up. Although several days had passed since my sister-in-law's last visit, I figured that's what she was talking about the other day, so I responded lightly, "Sure, I'll come over." It didn't seem like she had informed Robert, but she assured me I didn't need to let him know either. So I visited her the following day with a light heart. I rang my mother-in-law's doorbell and heard her shout, "It's open," from the yard. I turned the knob and stepped inside. An unpleasant odor was immediately noticeable. Dust had accumulated in the corners of the corridor, and towels and discarded socks were scattered around. The stench grew stronger as I entered the living room, where a stack of cushions was piled on the sofa. "Mom, are you here?" I murmured, wondering if she had gone somewhere. Then I heard, "I'm here," and followed the voice. I found my mother-in-law buried in the cushions on the couch, which seemed to be adjusted for comfort. The cushions were piled so high that I hadn't noticed her at first. "Excuse me, Mom, are you all right?" I called out as I approached her. The peculiar smell grew stronger. Trying not to gag from the smell, I searched for its source. "I'm okay. I just piled up the cushions because it's comfortable." She laughed heartily. I realized the source of the smell was my mother-in-law herself. With all my might, I tried not to pinch my nose and asked, "How's your leg? Were you unable to bathe because it was inconvenient?" She replied, Yes, about that. I healed quickly, but after a few days of not bathing due to the pain, I couldn't be bothered to take a shower." "Do I smell?" I refrained from answering directly and said, "I will clean up," then proceeded to open all the windows in the house. My mother-in-law certainly needed a thorough bath. Thinking this, I headed to the bathroom. The bathtub was filled with some water and left as is, with a lid half submerged. Soap scraps and towels were muddy in the wash basin, and the mirror was foggy and dirty. I couldn't remember the last time it had been cleaned. I wondered if my sister-in-law hadn't visited recently. How could this place be neglected for so long? For now, I cleaned the bathroom, filled the tub with fresh water, added some lemon bath salts for fragrance, and told my mother-in-law, "I've just cleaned the bathroom and prepared a bath for you. Please take a bath first. Meanwhile, I'll air out these cushions." The kitchen was in an appalling state, but the rest of the rooms only had a few layers of accumulated dust. The kitchen, however, looked as though roaches might be lurking around. Bracing myself, I cleaned it until it was spotless. "That was refreshing," my mother-in-law said as she returned to the living room, her cheeks flushed like a boiled lobster, glowing from having days of built-up grime washed off. Because I had been cleaning like crazy, the living room and kitchen were mostly tidied up, and she was very pleased with the result. Finally, in the clean living room, I asked her, "Mom, you were always so tidy and organized. What happened all of a sudden?" Ever since I got married, my mother-in-law had always been neat, and her house was well maintained. It was surprising to see her place in such a state, to the point where she needed to call for help. She sighed and said, "Did you notice that I just used my injured foot as an excuse? I've been living with my husband for decades, doing my best as a wife and mother. But last year, after my husband passed away, I felt a sudden sense of freedom." Her children were already independent and married. With her husband no longer with her, she wanted to slack off and do nothing for once. She continued, "I also know that the kids want to sell this house, and it could escalate into a nasty fight over it. But I have an idea." My mother-in-law gave me an intense stare, out of her usual character, as she shared her thoughts. As I listened to her, I felt like we were on the verge of something important. I had been idling away, lost in thought, trying to find answers. Leaving her house, I began to think about my own future as well. My relationship with my mother-in-law had always been as distant as a typical daughter-in-law and mother-in-law relationship. However, the fact that she revealed her lowest self to me, rather than to her biological daughter or son, felt indicative of her feelings. Days passed without sharing this incident with anyone. Then one evening, my husband Robert came home from work and blurted out, "We're going to invite my mom to live with us." As I was watching TV, I asked him to repeat himself. "We're inviting my mom to move in with us." "And what does your mom think?" I asked. "There's no need to ask her," he said. He seemed to think that any parent would be happy if their child offered to have them move in. "You should check with your mom first instead of just making decisions on your own," I suggested. In response, he smirked and turned around. What a high and mighty thing to say for a stay-at-home wife. Don't forget, if you can't obey what I say, divorce is always on the table. Seeing his face, I felt at my wit's end. He knew that, as a housewife nearing my 50s, I wouldn't be able to make it on my own if we divorced, which is why he was threatening me. He was attempting to stir up my anxiety and manipulate me at his will. But I had an unexpected savior, and unbeknownst to my husband, my life was about to take a dramatic turn. I ignored his provocative comment, finished dinner, and went to bed. My husband, feeling that he had completely cornered me with his divorce threat, was in a good mood. He was probably thinking of inviting his mother as planned, sweet-talking her into selling her house, and pocketing all the money for himself. The next morning, however, everything changed. I packed my belongings and left the house. When Robert came home to find an empty house, he seemed startled and began calling me incessantly. I read his incoming messages without responding, just to ensure he wouldn't cause any trouble by reporting me to the police. One of his messages read, "Are you so against living with my mom? But if we live together, the house will be ours. Don't you see how great that would be?" My suspicion was right. His interest wasn't in staying with his aging mother to support her, but rather in profiting off her house. I shared this with my mother-in-law. She looked a little sad, and it pained me a bit, but she seemed determined and said she would act according to her feelings. Yes, the place I went after leaving my husband was my mother-in-law's house. I took on a job and used her place as my base. Robert, growing anxious since I wasn't responding, blew up my phone with calls and texts. After a week, he contacted my family in Nebraska, and I got a call from my mom. "Laura, where are you? Robert claims that you're with us. He even said he's going to come get you, even though I told him you're not here." I explained the situation to my mother and informed her that I was currently staying at my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law then took the phone, offering a long greeting. For some reason, my mother gave me a word of encouragement, wishing me the best of luck. Eventually, my mother-in-law said, "It's about time," and that night she called my husband. Robert was surprised to learn from his own mother that I was not at my parents' house and immediately came over. "Leaving the house so abruptly, I had no idea you were at Mom's. What's this about?" Robert blurted out the moment he saw me. Before I could even answer, my mother-in-law spoke up. "More than that, do you even understand why Laura left home?" Taken aback by her sudden question, Robert awkwardly replied, "Well, that was because I said I wanted to invite Mom over. Because she didn't want to live with you, right? Why would I be here if I didn't want to live with my mother-in-law?" Ever thought about that? You see, it wasn't the idea of moving in with her that I disliked. What I hated was you making selfish decisions without considering others' feelings. I continued, "My mother-in-law has her own thoughts and hopes, you know. Despite this, you decided on living together without even discussing it with her. You didn't even consider the feelings of your parents when they built this house. You just want this house because you want the money, right?" Robert clenched his fists and hardened his body, looking down as he listened to our conversation. My mother-in-law continued after me, "What you really need this house for, Robert? Or is it Laura? If you don't change, you'll lose both. Why don't you cool down for a while and rethink everything?" Hearing this from his own mother, Robert, who had been quietly listening, suddenly kneeled to the ground in front of us. I was taken aback and asked, "What's this about?" "I apologize to Laura and to you, Mom," Robert said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Please, I want to live together again and start anew." Raising his head from his bow, Robert continued, "Mom, will you live with us?" As Robert bowed down again, I looked at my mother-in-law and we shared a knowing smirk. After that, I resumed my life with Robert, but this time, I wasn't a stay-at-home wife anymore. My mother-in-law told her friends about how I deep-cleaned her room, transforming it from a mess from the time she spent lazing around into a sparkling space in just a couple of hours. I continued, "My mother-in-law has her own thoughts and hopes, you know. Despite this, you decided on living together without even discussing it with her. You didn't even consider the feelings of your parents when they built this house. You just want this house because you want the money, right?" Robert clenched his fists and hardened his body, looking down as he listened to our conversation. My mother-in-law continued after me, "What do you really need this house for, Robert? Or is it Laura? If you don't change, you'll lose both. Why don't you cool down for a while and rethink everything?" Hearing this from his own mother, Robert, who had been quietly listening, suddenly kneeled to the ground in front of us. I was taken aback and asked, What's this about? I apologize to Laura and to you, Mom, Robert said, his voice filled with sincerity. Please, I want to live together again and start anew. Raising his head from his bow, Robert continued, Mom, will you live with us? As Robert bowed down again, I looked at my mother-in-law and we shared a knowing smirk. After that, I resumed my life with Robert, but this time, I wasn't a stay-at-home wife anymore. My mother-in-law told her friends about how I deep-cleaned her room, transforming it from a mess from the time she spent lazing around into a sparkling space in just a couple of hours. When I mentioned this to my friends, many of them said they wanted me to do the same for their homes. I was amazed and delighted to find that I could apply my housekeeping skills from being a stay-at-home wife to start a new job. I also began studying to become a storage advisor. It seemed that Robert had not given up on the idea of living with his mother, selling their house, and getting a large amount of money. He seemed to think that it would become a reality now that my mother-in-law and I were getting along. But there was a surprise announcement from my mother-in-law. Surprisingly, she was getting remarried. So, I won't be living with you and I won't be giving up my house either, she said. Upon hearing the news, my sister-in-law congratulated her, although with mixed feelings. I sent my sincere blessings for my mother-in-law's decision. The one who was surprised by my mother-in-law's words and screamed out in shock was Robert. At the same time, he was frantically contacting various people. Apparently, Robert had taken a boating license without telling me and even purchased a small cruiser, counting on the money from selling his parents' house. Now that his plans had fallen apart, Robert was unable to cancel his order for the cruiser, and he seemed to have to work even harder than before. He ended up having to help me with my house cleaning job. As an employer, I'm drilling household chores to Robert and guiding him to clean and polish a great number of my clients' houses.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully." Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look, "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day." Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. "So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.